History was not built only by geniuses, kings, and careful planners. Sometimes it was built by people who looked at danger, common sense, and basic paperwork, then said, "Actually, I have a worse idea." Today, the biggest hold my beer moments in history, from flying lawn chairs and pirate career changes to emperors, warriors, pilots, and leaders who treated reality like it owed them an apology. 1. In 1982, Larry Walters looked at a lawn chair and somehow saw an aircraft. Not a metaphorical aircraft, a real one. He tied dozens of weather balloons to a patio chair, packed a pellet gun so he could shoot balloons to descend, grabbed some snacks, and launched himself over California like a man whose aviation school was a hardware store receipt. His plan was to float gently above his neighborhood. Cute. Instead, he shot thousands of feet into the sky and drifted toward controlled airspace near Los Angeles International Airport, because apparently the chair wanted to network with commercial jets. Pilots reported seeing a man in a lawn chair floating past, which is the kind of radio call that makes air traffic control stare at the ceiling and reconsider civilization. Larry survived, but the Federal Aviation Administration was not amused. Shocking, really, that balloon chairman near airplanes did not get a standing ovation from regulators. 2. Nero entering the Olympic Games. In 67 AD is one of those stories that proves ancient sports were only fair until an emperor walked in wearing ego as armor. Nero competed in a chariot race, which already sounds suspicious because when the ruler of Rome joins your event, the scoreboard starts sweating. During the race, he reportedly fell from the chariot and failed to finish properly. In most athletic competitions, that is called losing. In Nero's personal universe, it was called a dramatic version of winning. The judges awarded him victory anyway, because their survival instincts were in excellent condition. Imagine being another competitor, training for years, mastering horses, balance, speed, and danger, only to lose to a man who crashed. Nero did not win because he was the best racer. He won because everyone involved understood that telling the emperor no could become a very short career path. Gold medal in chariot racing, gold medal in threatening the vibe. 3. When Julius Caesar was kidnapped by pirates around 75 before Christ, he reacted with the confidence of a man reviewing a disappointing hotel. The pirates demanded a ransom, and Caesar supposedly got offended because the amount was too low. Imagine abducting a young Roman noble, and he starts correcting your pricing strategy like a hostage with premium customer service expectations. He told them they should ask for more, then spent his captivity bossing them around, joking with them, and telling them he would eventually come back and have them crucified. The pirates laughed, probably thinking, "This rich kid is hilarious." Unfortunately for them, Caesar was not doing comedy. After the ransom was paid, he raised ships, captured the pirates, and carried out his threat. Most people leave captivity grateful to be alive. Caesar left with vengeance, a schedule, and the terrifying energy of someone who keeps receipts. The pirates kidnapped a hostage and accidentally subscribed to consequences. 4. Lord Byron at Cambridge is a perfect example of weaponized loophole energy. Trinity College had rules against students keeping dogs, which sounds clear enough. But Byron, being Byron, did not hear no pets. He heard, "The legal department has failed to mention bears." So according to the famous story, he brought a bear. Not a tiny rebellious hamster, not a secret cat. A bear, the kind of animal that makes a dormitory feel like a badly managed royal forest. This was not obedience. This was a wealthy poet grabbing the rule book, turning it upside down, and asking if anyone had specifically banned chaos with fur. Cambridge wanted discipline, polish, and young gentlemen behaving like future pillars of society. Byron gave them a walking insurance problem. Somewhere, some college official probably had to say out loud, "Technically, he is correct," which is the saddest sentence in bureaucracy. If dogs were banned, Byron would simply upgrade the threat level. 5. In 1989, Pepsi briefly found itself connected to a batch of old Soviet military vessels through a barter deal, because Cold War economics sometimes sounded like a fever dream written by a vending machine. The Soviet Union wanted Pepsi, but hard currency was complicated, so payment came through trade arrangements involving vodka and, eventually, aging ships that could be resold for scrap. This is how a soda company briefly gained headlines as if it had acquired a navy. To be clear, Pepsi was not about to invade anyone with submarines powered by caramel coloring. The ships were not becoming some fizzy armada. But the image is too perfect to ignore. While other companies argued over market share, Pepsi somehow ended up in a sentence with naval assets. Imagine being Coca-Cola and realizing your competitor's quarterly report includes possible destroyer. It was capitalism, diplomacy, sugar, and scrap metal in one glorious mess. The Cold War had many strange chapters, but soda with ships is elite nonsense. 6. Miyamoto Musashi's duel with Sasaki Kojiro in 1612 feels less like a formal samurai encounter and more like psychological warfare performed by a man who understood irritation as a weapon. Kojiro was a feared swordsman with a famous long blade. Musashi, rather than arriving early, bowing politely, and following the nice, tidy etiquette of lethal violence, reportedly showed up late. Already rude. Then he arrived carrying a wooden sword he had carved from an oar while traveling to the duel. An oar, the thing you use to move a boat. Musashi basically weaponized beach equipment and walked into one of Japan's most famous fights like he had stopped at a dock and thought, "This will do." But the disrespect was not random. The delay, the strange weapon, the timing, all of it may have thrown Kojiro off balance before the fight even began. Musashi killed him quickly. It was not pretty ceremony. It was strategy wearing the mask of bad manners. 7. In 1835, President Andrew Jackson survived the first known assassination attempt against a sitting American president, and his reaction was exactly as subtle as a brick through a window. Richard Lawrence aimed pistols at him, but both weapons misfired. Now, the reasonable presidential response would be to move away and let security handle the armed man. Jackson, elderly and in poor health, chose the more Jacksonian option: attack the assassin with his cane. This man did not duck for cover. He advanced like the failed bullets had personally insulted him. Bystanders had to restrain him because the president was trying to beat his would-be killer in public with a walking stick. It is terrifying, absurd, and extremely 19th century American. Imagine planning an assassination and discovering that your target's backup plan is grandfather with rage and hardwood. Jackson's politics can be debated forever, but in that moment, his survival instinct was not flight. It was blunt force customer feedback. 8. During the siege of Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed II had a problem that would make most commanders grumble into their helmets. The Byzantine defenders had blocked the Golden Horn with a great chain, keeping Ottoman ships out of the harbor. This was supposed to be a very serious defensive measure. Mehmed looked at the blocked water and essentially said, "Fine, I will make the land do navy things." His forces dragged ships overland on greased logs, hauling them across the hills and launching them into the Golden Horn from the wrong side of the problem. That is not a workaround. That is a siege engine made of stubbornness. Imagine being a defender, feeling safe because the harbor is chained, then waking up to enemy ships in the harbor anyway, because your opponent treated geography like a suggestion box. Constantinople had walls, chains, history, and confidence. Mehmed brought boat delivery by hill. Medieval logistics had officially lost its mind. 9. Annie Edson. Taylor going over Niagara Falls in a barrel in 1901 is the kind of retirement plan that makes financial advisors quietly close their laptops. She was a 63-year-old school teacher, not a circus strongman, not a daredevil celebrity, not someone whose job description involved being sealed inside plumbing-adjacent furniture and dropped into thunder. But she needed money and attention, so she had a barrel specially prepared, climbed inside with padding and air, and went over one of the most powerful waterfalls on Earth. Somehow, she survived. She became the first known person to survive the stunt, though the fame did not turn into the fortune she hoped for. That makes it even more painfully human. She risked everything, got history, and still had to worry about money. Niagara Falls is where most people take photos and feel humbled by nature. Annie saw it and thought, "This might be my business model." Nature screamed. She went anyway. 10. Alexander the Great had many talents, and one of them was making his bodyguards age rapidly. During the attack on a Malian city in 326 before Christ, his soldiers were climbing the walls too slowly for his taste. So Alexander grabbed a ladder and went up first because apparently king and reckless motivational poster were the same job. Then the ladders broke behind him, leaving him trapped inside the enemy fortress with only a few companions. This is the point where even courage starts looking at the exit. Alexander was surrounded and seriously wounded, while his army outside panicked because their commander had just turned himself into a very expensive hostage. His soldiers fought desperately to reach him. Yes, it showed incredible bravery. It also showed the management style of a man who motivates employees by jumping into a death pit and making everyone else solve it. Alexander did not lead from the front. He led from inside the enemy's personal space. 11. In 1987, Matias Rust, a 19-year-old from West Germany, flew a small Cessna from Finland through Soviet air defenses and landed near Red Square in Moscow. During the Cold War, this was not just a prank with wings. The Soviet Union had a massive military defense system built to detect threats from NATO, nuclear bombers, and terrifying geopolitical scenarios. Then a teenager in a tiny plane slipped through like he was delivering awkward international embarrassment. Soviet radar detected him at different points, but confusion, hesitation, and bureaucracy turned the response into a slow-motion faceplant. By the time Rust landed, the damage was not physical. It was humiliation. A young man with a small aircraft had exposed huge weaknesses in one of the most intimidating defense systems on Earth. The Soviet military did not get bombed. It got publicly audited by a flying teenager. Somewhere, a general had to explain why the empire was outmaneuvered by aviation's equivalent of a compact car. 12. Stede Bonnet became a pirate in 1717, with the energy of a rich man having the worst midlife crisis in the Caribbean. Most pirates came from rough maritime backgrounds, privateering, naval service, or desperate lives at sea. Bonnet was a wealthy plantation owner from Barbados. Naturally, instead of buying a louder coat or taking up gardening, he purchased a ship, hired a crew on salaries, and announced himself as a pirate despite not really knowing how to be one. That is like buying a hospital and saying, "I am a surgeon now because I own the building." His ship was called the Revenge, because subtlety had already walked into the ocean. Bonnet's crew often knew far more than he did, which is awkward when your workplace includes storms, cannons, mutiny, and hanging. If captured. He became known as the Gentleman Pirate, a title that sounds elegant until you translate it as wealthy amateur entering armed robbery with startup energy. 13. Hannibal crossing the Alps in 218 before Christ remains one of history's finest examples of a commander looking at an impossible route and saying, "Perfect, they will never expect the stupid option." Rome was powerful, alert, and difficult to surprise. Hannibal's solution was to march from Iberia, through Gaul, and over the Alps into Italy, bringing an army, supplies, cavalry, and war elephants. Elephants, across the Alps. Because apparently, the ancient world's logistics department had been replaced by a dare. The journey was brutal. Freezing weather, cliffs, hostile tribes, landslides, exhaustion, and animals that were not designed for mountain tourism. Hannibal lost many men and beasts, but he emerged into Italy and shocked Rome badly. It was a strategic masterpiece wrapped in a survival disaster. Rome expected an invasion. It did not expect a Carthaginian general to appear through the mountains with elephants like the world's most aggressive travel documentary. 14. In 1974, Philippe Petit secretly stretched a wire between the twin towers of the World Trade Center and walked across it more than 1,000 feet above Manhattan. This was not a permitted artistic event with polite paperwork and a smiling safety committee. It was an illegal, carefully planned operation involving disguises, hidden gear, sneaking past security, and the kind of confidence that should come with a warning label. Petit stepped out onto the cable while the city existed far below him, then walked, turned, knelt, and even lay down on the wire as if gravity had agreed to a temporary ceasefire. Police waited to arrest him, which is fair, because "Please stop performing ballet in the sky between skyscrapers" is a reasonable public request. But the stunt became legendary because it was beautiful, insane, and completely unnecessary in the most human way. Petit saw two towers and did not think office space. He thought sidewalk. 15. Pope Julius II was called the Warrior Pope, and that was not just a spicy nickname invented by bored historians. In the early 1500s, he personally involved himself in military campaigns, wore armor, and worked aggressively to expand and defend the Papal States. This was a pope whose calendar seemed to include prayer, diplomacy, art patronage, and possibly asking where someone left his siege equipment. Renaissance Italy was a chaotic mess of city-states, foreign armies, shifting alliances, and powerful families acting like everyone had been trapped in a chess game with knives. Julius decided the papacy needed to be more than a spiritual authority. It needed muscle. So yes, the same pope associated with Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel also had serious battlefield energy. That is quite a range. 1 minute, paint the ceiling. Next minute, bring my armor. The man turned the papal office into a Renaissance action franchise. 16. Hugh Glass's survival after a grizzly bear attack in 1823 is not funny in itself, and it should not be treated like a goofy adventure. It was brutal. Glass, a frontier trapper, was mauled terribly and left in such bad condition that his companions expected him to die. 2 men assigned to stay behind eventually abandoned him, taking his weapons and supplies. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, Glass somehow lived. Injured, alone, and in hostile wilderness, he began moving towards civilization. Sometimes crawling, sometimes staggering, he covered an astonishing distance while dealing with wounds, hunger, exposure, and the kind of pain that makes ordinary discomfort look like a spa treatment. The hold my beer energy here is not stupidity, it is refusal. Everyone had mentally placed him in the grave, and Glass declined the appointment. Death showed up with paperwork. Glass did not sign. Then he started moving. 17. According to the primary chronicle, Prince Oleg attacked Constantinople in 907 and ran into the usual problem with attacking one of the most famously defended cities in the world. The defenders had made things annoying. Chains protected the harbor, walls guarded the city, and Constantinople generally behaved like a fortress with a superiority complex. The legendary solution attributed to Oleg was absurdly cinematic. He supposedly ordered boats to be placed on wheels so they could move over land. Is this story wrapped in legend? Absolutely. Medieval chronicles did not exactly have a please avoid drama department. But as a piece of historical imagination, it is spectacular. The message is basically, if you block the sea route, the Navy will become a carriage. Imagine looking out from the walls and seeing ships rolling at you like some early medieval fever dream. It is either brilliant intimidation, legendary exaggeration, or both. Either way, it has premium hold my mead energy. 18. Napoleon escaping from Elba in 1815 is one of history's greatest examples of a man refusing to accept that the movie had ended. After being defeated and exiled to the small Mediterranean island, Napoleon was supposed to stay there quietly, perhaps reflect, maybe take walks, maybe annoy local administrators with opinions. Instead, he escaped with a small group of followers and sailed back to France. The government sent troops to stop him, but Napoleon's personal brand was still dangerously powerful. Soldiers who were supposed to arrest him began joining him. At one famous moment, he reportedly exposed himself to their fire and invited them to shoot their emperor if they wished. They did not. His return became the 100 Days, a brief and dramatic comeback that terrified Europe all over again. Most exiles send letters. Napoleon returned to power. Europe had tried to uninstall him, but he reopened himself from the desktop. 19. The Stamford Bridge Berserker story from 1066 sits in that wonderful medieval zone where history and legend are arm wrestling in a smoky room. After King Harald Hardrada's Norse army was surprised by the English, the battle centered around a narrow bridge. Later accounts describe one enormous Viking warrior holding the crossing alone, cutting down attackers and delaying the English advance. The only way to stop him, according to the tale, was for an English soldier to float underneath the bridge and stab him from below with a spear. Is this exact detail guaranteed fact? No. It has the flavor of a story that has been told in halls by men drinking something strong. But it survives because the image is unforgettable. One warrior turning a bridge into his personal complaint department. Tactically, narrow crossings can make one fighter dangerous. Dramatically, this was a Viking standing in traffic and saying, "The bridge is closed." 20. Nellie Bly's race around the world in 1889 was a direct slap in the face to anyone who thought women journalists should stay in a small professional box labeled "pleasant little stories." Jules Verne had written Around the World in 80 days, and Bly decided fiction needed competition. She persuaded her newspaper to send her around the globe, then traveled by steamship, train, carriage, rickshaw, and whatever else could move faster than doubt. She carried very little luggage, which already makes her stronger than most modern travelers packing for a weekend. Bly completed the journey in 72 days, beating the fictional record and becoming an international sensation. She did not merely write a story, she turned herself into the headline, the experiment, and the proof of concept. Imagine outracing a novel. Phileas Fogg had plot armor. Nellie Bly had deadlines, nerve, and a travel schedule that looked like it was assembled by a caffeinated telegraph operator. 21. Cyrus the Great. Capturing Babylon in 539 before Christ became famous partly because of a brilliant siege story involving the Euphrates River. Ancient sources say the Persians diverted or lowered the river, allowing troops to enter Babylon through the riverbed under the walls. Babylon was not some sleepy village with a fence. It was one of the great cities of the ancient world, famous for its defenses and power. Attacking it directly was a huge problem. Cyrus allegedly solved that problem by changing the battlefield itself. That is the level of strategy where walls start feeling personally disrespected. Most armies bring ladders, battering rams, or angry speeches. Cyrus looked at the river and said, "You are now part of the invasion plan." Historians debate details, as they should, because ancient sources enjoy a little drama. But the idea remains legendary. If the gate is too strong, enter through the plumbing. 22. Operation Paul Bunyan in 1976 began with one of the strangest and most deadly disputes of the Cold War: a tree in the Korean demilitarized zone. The tree blocked visibility near a checkpoint. When a trimming attempt led to North Korean soldiers killing 2 American officers, the United States and South Korea responded with a massive show of force to finish cutting it down. And by massive, we mean the kind of military presence normally reserved for events much larger than landscaping. Troops, helicopters, aircraft, and heavy backup stood ready while the tree was cut. The name came from the giant lumberjack of American folklore, because if you are going to turn a tree into an international incident, you might as well brand it properly. The operation was designed to prevent further violence by showing overwhelming resolve. Still, the basic sentence remains insane. Superpowers nearly rattled the planet over a tree, then solved it with chainsaws and fighter jets. 23. Alcibiades was the ancient Greek political equivalent of a man who keeps changing teams in the middle of the match and somehow still gets invited to the next game. He was brilliant, charismatic, handsome, persuasive, and apparently constructed entirely out of ambition and bad judgment. During the Peloponnesian War, he pushed Athens toward the disastrous Sicilian expedition, then got accused of sacrilege and recalled for trial. Did he return calmly to defend himself? Of course not. He defected to Sparta and started advising Athens' enemies. Then he got into trouble there too, connected with Persian power, and eventually maneuvered his way back toward Athens. This was not diplomacy, this was geopolitical parkour. Alcibiades treated loyalty like a subscription he could cancel and renew depending on the month. The wild part is that he was often useful because he really was talented. History's problem child had excellent references from every side he betrayed. 24. Mad Jack. Churchill went into World War II carrying a sword, a longbow, and bagpipes, which is the sort of equipment list that makes you check whether he misunderstood the century. He was a British officer, and he seemed determined to fight modern war with the aesthetic of a medieval side quest. Tanks existed, aircraft existed, machine guns existed. Jack still brought a blade and a bow because apparently he believed style should survive industrial warfare. He is famously associated with carrying a basket-hilted sword in combat and playing the bagpipes during operations. That does not mean the war was funny. It was catastrophic and brutal. But Churchill's personal eccentricity became legendary because it was so bizarrely out of time. He looked at the 20th century's terrifying machinery and said, "Fine, but I will be bringing my own soundtrack." Some officers carried maps. Jack carried a weapon loadout from 3 different eras and somehow made it his brand. 25. Henry Box. Brown's escape in 1849 was one of the most courageous and desperate acts in American history. Born into slavery, Brown arranged with abolitionists to ship himself from Virginia to Philadelphia in a wooden crate. This was not a stunt for attention. It was a life-risking response to an inhuman system that denied him freedom, family security, and legal personhood. He spent many hours trapped in a cramped box, sometimes handled upside down, with limited air and no guarantee he would survive the journey. When the box finally arrived in a free state, Brown emerged alive. The audacity is astonishing, but the emotional weight matters even more. He turned the ordinary shipping network of the country into a secret route toward liberation. There is no cheap joke here, because the situation was too serious. But as a hold my beer moment of human nerve, it is almost impossible to top. The system tried to make him property. He mailed himself out of it. 26. Caligula's floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae in 39 AD is the kind of imperial project that makes taxpayers across 2,000 years feel tired. Ancient sources say he ordered ships to be lined up across the bay, covered with earth, and turned into a temporary floating road. Then he rode across it, reportedly in a dramatic military display. One explanation says he was mocking a prediction that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across that bay. A normal person might ignore the insult. Caligula allegedly responded by building a giant floating, "Actually I can," out of boats. That is not infrastructure. That is an argument with a budget. Roman engineers could build roads, aqueducts, and harbors. Under Caligula, they also apparently had to build the ancient version of a billionaire's comment section reply. He did not just prove a point. He made the sea hold still for his ego parade. 27. King John of Bohemia, charging at Crécy in 1346. While blind is one of those medieval stories that makes modern risk assessment burst into flames. John was an experienced warrior and respected king, but by the time of the battle he could no longer see. Most people, under those circumstances, would choose a safe command position, or perhaps a chair very far from arrows. John chose the knightly honor option. According to tradition, he asked his companions to tie his horse's reins to theirs and lead him into the fight so he could strike a blow. That is courage, loyalty to warrior culture, and catastrophic decision-making all braided together like a medieval friendship bracelet. He and the knights around him were killed. The story became famous because it captured the brutal ideal of chivalry. Glory mattered so much that even blindness did not excuse absence from battle. He could not see the danger. He rode into it anyway. 28. William Walker making himself president of Nicaragua in 1856 sounds like a villain backstory written by a man who was banned from normal ambition. Walker was an American filibuster, which in this context means a private adventurer who launched military expeditions into foreign countries, not someone giving a long speech in Congress. With a small armed force and huge confidence, he inserted himself into Nicaraguan politics during a civil conflict and eventually became president. For a time, the United States recognized his government. That is the part where the story stops sounding like a bar bet and starts sounding like a diplomatic migraine. Walker's rule was aggressive, destabilizing, and deeply tied to pro-slavery ambitions. Central American countries eventually united against him and drove him out. But the fact that he got that far is absurd. Most people visit another country and buy souvenirs. Walker arrived with mercenaries and said, "What if I were the government?" 29. Jan Žižka's war wagons in the 1420s were a beautiful nightmare for medieval knights who expected battle to work like a noble sport with horses. Žižka, a Hussite commander in Bohemia, helped turn wagons into mobile fortresses. His forces chained them together, positioned them tactically, and filled the defensive formation with crossbowmen, early firearms, and disciplined infantry. So when armored cavalry charged in expecting glory, they met a wagon wall full of people having a very bad day on purpose. It was practical, ugly, and brilliant. This was not the shining romance of chivalry. This was, your expensive horse is about to lose an argument with parking. Žižka's achievements are even more remarkable because he continued commanding after losing his sight. He adapted to enemies with better equipment and higher status by changing the rules. Knights brought prestige. Žižka brought tactical farm equipment and made it humiliating. 30. Horatius Cocles holding the bridge is one of Rome's classic heroic legends. And yes, it has been polished by centuries of patriotic storytelling until it shines like a marble statue doing push-ups. Around 508 before Christ, enemy forces threatened Rome by approaching a bridge over the Tiber. According to the tale, Horatius and a few companions defended the bridge while Romans behind them chopped it down to stop the enemy crossing. When his companions withdrew, Horatius remained alone long enough for the bridge to be destroyed, then supposedly jumped into the river and swam back to safety despite being wounded. Historically, we should be cautious. Legend loves a dramatic solo performance. But as a cultural story, it tells us exactly what Romans admired: duty, courage, and the willingness to become a human doorstop for the city. Horatius basically said, "You break the bridge, I will handle customer service." The customers had swords. 31. In 1513, Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama and became the first European known to see the Pacific Ocean from the Americas. Then he performed one of the most aggressively imperial gestures imaginable. He walked into the water in armor, raised his sword, and claimed the sea and surrounding lands for Spain. Let us pause there. The Pacific Ocean is enormous. It covers more of the planet than any empire could reasonably understand at the time. It did not become Spanish because a damp man in the metal clothing said so. But that was how European conquest often worked. Arrive, perform ceremony, rename things, and act like geography just signed legal documents. Balboa's crossing mattered because it opened Spanish ambitions toward the Pacific and connected European imagination to a vast new ocean. Still, the visual is unbelievable. He saw the largest ocean on Earth and responded with, "Mine." Confidence had officially left the map. 32. Jeanne de Clisson's transformation into a pirate of revenge in the 1340s is the sort of story that sounds like legend because reality sometimes hires better writers than fiction. Her husband, Olivier de Clisson, was executed by the French king on accusations of treason during the turmoil of the 100 Years' War. Jeanne did not quietly disappear into grief. According to tradition, she sold property, raised forces, and launched attacks on French ships in the English Channel. Her ships were later remembered as black with red sails, which is exactly the color scheme you choose when your life has become a warning label. She became known as the Lioness of Brittany. The details have been romanticized over time, but the core image remains powerful. A noblewoman turning personal loss into maritime retaliation against a king's side. Some people write furious letters. Jeanne allegedly built a fleet. That is not revenge served cold. That is revenge served with cannons and weather exposure. 33. Apollo 11 landing on the moon in 1969 is remembered as calm, noble, and perfectly heroic, but the final descent was much messier than the clean textbook version. As the lunar module Eagle approached the surface, its guidance computer began throwing 1201 and 1202 alarms. That meant the computer was overloaded, which is not the message you want from your machine while approaching another world for the first time in human history. Mission Control had to decide quickly whether the alarms were survivable. Then Neil Armstrong saw that the planned landing area was covered with dangerous rocks and took more manual control, flying farther to find a safer spot. Meanwhile, fuel was running low. So the first moon landing became a combination of computer warnings, human judgment, engineering trust, and elite-level calm under pressure. Armstrong did not land because everything went perfectly. He landed because trained people handled imperfection without losing their minds. Humanity reached the moon with alarms blinking and the gas tank getting rude. Now be honest, who did we criminally leave out? Not someone interesting. I mean the most outrageous historical maniac who deserves to be on this list and would make half these people look responsible. Drop the name in the comments and defend it like your reputation depends on it. And if this video gave you at least one story you're going to annoy someone with later, hit like and subscribe. History clearly has more bad ideas to expose.